For over a century, this document was deemed too dangerous even for Theosophists themselves. Helena Blavatsky wrote about the final state of the soul and shortly afterward fell mysteriously ill. The text remained sealed, labeled incomplete, but now it has been deciphered. What she describes within challenges everything we know about life, death, and return. The final paragraph was censored by 3 secret societies, but today you will hear every word. It began in the dusty archives of Adyar, India, a forgotten manuscript, its yellowed pages bound with strange blue twine, hidden beneath floorboards that hadn't been disturbed since 1891. When the restoration specialist lifted the bundle, a faint scent of sandalwood and something else, something electric, filled the small room. The handwriting inside was unmistakable, the bold, determined strokes of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the woman who bridged Eastern and Western mysticism and founded the Theosophical Society. But this wasn't just any manuscript. This was her final work, written in a trance state during the last months of her life. A work so controversial that even her closest followers decided it must remain hidden from the world. Why? Because what Blavatsky revealed about the soul's journey after death contradicted not just religious dogma, but the fundamental assumptions of her own teachings. And most shockingly, it aligned perfectly with quantum discoveries that wouldn't emerge for another century. The year was 1891. While deathly ill in London, Blavatsky entered what witnesses described as her deepest trance state ever recorded. For 7 consecutive nights, she wrote continuously while her eyes remained closed, filling page after page with descriptions of what she called the machinery of consciousness, the precise mechanisms by which the soul detaches, transitions, and ultimately returns. For decades, this document was classified as untranslatable and sent to the hidden archive of the Theosophical Institute in Adyar. Access was denied even to inner members. Only in 2023 did a restorer discover a layer of spectral ink hidden on the last page. And there it was, an equation, a symbol, and a phrase that change everything you thought about your own soul. From which city are you watching this right now? I want to know how far this knowledge is echoing. To understand the magnitude of this discovery, we need to examine the strange circumstances surrounding the manuscript's journey. This isn't just about hidden knowledge, it's about why certain revelations have been systematically suppressed throughout human history. In 1891, immediately after completing the manuscript, Blavatsky's health deteriorated rapidly. Her longtime secretary, Countess Constance Wachtmeister, recorded in her personal diary, which itself remained sealed until 1972, that Blavatsky had crossed a line and seen what mortal eyes should not witness. 3 days after finishing the final page, Blavatsky developed a high fever and lost the ability to speak. She died on May 8, 1891. The manuscript was immediately seized by Annie Besant, who would later lead the Theosophical Society. According to letters discovered in 2018, Besant was deeply troubled by the content, writing to a confidant, "If this were to become public, everything we've built would be questioned. It goes beyond our doctrine. It goes beyond all doctrine." The document was sealed in a lead-lined box, wrapped in silk soaked in a preservation solution, and hidden in a secret compartment beneath the meditation hall in Adyar. A notation on the outside, written in Besant's hand, read simply, "Not to be opened until the third eye awakens in humanity." For decades, rumors of this manuscript circulated among inner circles of mystics, scientists, and philosophers. In 1919, during a period of spiritual revival following the horrors of World War I, Annie Besant apparently reconsidered her decision. Historical records indicate she attempted to release portions of the text at a closed session of the Theosophical World Congress in Paris. But something happened during that session, something that was never officially recorded. What we do know is that Besant fell silent midway through her presentation. According to 3 separate accounts from attendees, she stared at the back of the hall for nearly a full minute, her face draining of color, before abruptly closing, her notes and stating, "The time has not yet come, I was mistaken." She never again attempted to make the manuscript public. By 1962, quantum physics was beginning to suggest models of reality that sounded suspiciously like ancient mystical teachings. During a closed United Nations symposium on consciousness studies, fragments of Blavatsky's final work were anonymously submitted to the scientific panel. Physicist Wolfgang Pauli, known for his work on quantum mechanics, reportedly became obsessed with these fragments, recognizing in them a mathematical underpinning to consciousness that aligned with his own theoretical work. In his private notes, recently declassified, Pauli wrote, "If this is authentic, then she somehow knew in 1891 what we are only now beginning to prove in the laboratory. The implications are unsettling." The manuscript remained mostly hidden until 2023, when Dr. Helena Petrovna, a specialist in historical document restoration, was granted permission to examine the Theosophical Society's most sensitive archives. Using a specialized deep-layer spectroscope, technology originally developed for examining quantum states, Dr. Patel discovered something extraordinary. The final pages of the manuscript contained a second layer of writing, visible only under specific light frequencies. This hidden text appeared to be written in a different hand than Blavatsky's, smaller, more precise, almost mechanical in its perfection. And the symbol hidden in the final signature didn't match any known occult system. This is where our story takes its first dramatic turn. Because what Dr. Patel found wasn't just another esoteric teaching, it was a precise, mathematical description of consciousness transition, what we commonly call death, that reads more like a physicist's field equations than a mystic's vision. The manuscript didn't just claim that consciousness survives physical death. It explained exactly how, through what mechanisms, and most disturbingly, how this process could potentially be interrupted, extended, or even reversed under specific conditions. As Blavatsky wrote in the newly revealed text, death is not a door but a lens, a focusing of awareness back into its natural state. The soul does not go anywhere, it expands everywhere. But the most shocking revelation came from the hidden layer of text, the part written by the unknown hand. The pattern can be traced, measured, and eventually replicated. Consciousness leaves an electromagnetic signature as unique as a fingerprint and as eternal as light. When news of this discovery began to circulate in scientific circles, it created an immediate division. Some dismissed it outright as the desperate fabrications of a dying mystic. Others recognized in it the same patterns. They were observing in their own quantum research, patterns for which modern science still has no explanation. And perhaps most significantly, the hidden mathematical formulas in the margins of the last page align with recent discoveries in both consciousness studies and quantum physics. Discoveries made over a century after Blavatsky wrote them, down in a trance state. So what exactly did this forbidden manuscript contain, and why has it been kept from public view for over a century? Let me take you deeper into the actual content of Blavatsky's forbidden manuscript, the three key revelations that have caused such controversy among those few who have been permitted to examine it. The first revelation comes from what scholars now call the quantum sigil, a complex geometric pattern that only became fully visible under ultraviolet spectroscopic analysis. When the restoration team first applied the specialized lighting, they were startled by what appeared, a spiral-like design resembling a black hole with converging vectors, interpreted as a map of the incarnation cycle. It simply appeared, as if floating above the page, Dr. Patel recalled in her research notes. The ink wasn't visible under normal light. It must have been created with some compound that only becomes visible under specific frequencies. The design shows 7 concentric spirals, each containing mathematical notations in margins so tiny they required microscopic analysis. These notations describe what Blavatsky called the soul's momentum, the precise vibrational frequency that carries consciousness from one state to another. What makes this particularly astonishing is that these equations bear striking similarities to current quantum field equations describing particle entanglement and wave function collapse, concepts that wouldn't be formulated until decades after Blavatsky's death. Dr. James Whitcomb, quantum physicist at Cambridge University, reluctantly acknowledged the connection. The mathematical structure is unmistakable. It's as if she somehow intuited quantum field dynamics before we had the language or instruments to detect these phenomena. The probability of this being coincidental is, well, statistically negligible. The implications of this first revelation are profound. If Blavatsky's sigil accurately maps consciousness transition, then the soul doesn't die or dissolve. It follows predictable, measurable patterns of transformation. Our consciousness may operate according to the same quantum principles that govern particles at the subatomic level, principles like non-locality, entanglement, and superposition. This would mean that what we experience as death is merely a phase transition, similar to how water becomes vapor. Same essence, different form. And most significantly, if these patterns are traceable, then the boundaries between life and death may be more permeable than we've believed. But alongside this geometric pattern was something even more puzzling. A numerical sequence that, according to 3 separate analysts, shows remarkable similarities to codes currently used by NASA to track cosmic radiation patterns. How could Blavatsky in 1891 have produced calculations that align with 21st century astrophysics? The second key revelation came from the central text itself, where Blavatsky introduces a concept she never mentioned in any of her published works: the mental double or second mind. In the middle of a densely written passage describing consciousness transition, she suddenly introduces this term. The mental double remains dormant throughout physical existence, awakening only when the primary consciousness relinquishes its hold on material reality. It is not a duplicate, but a complement, containing all that the waking self does not. This concept describes a second instance of consciousness that remains inactive during physical life, awakening only after bodily death. According to Blavatsky's detailed description, this dormant aspect of self serves as both a bridge to higher states of consciousness and a repository of all experiences across multiple lifetimes. The second mind carries the complete record of not just this life, but all lives, she writes. It is the true thread that connects incarnations, not through abstract karma, but through concrete memory patterns encoded in quantum structures, beyond physical matter. If true, this means there's a part of you that you haven't yet met, a wider awareness that activates when your physical body ceases. This would explain near-death experiences where people report expanded awareness and access to knowledge they couldn't possibly possess. It suggests we are dual beings. Limited consciousness housed in temporary form, connected to a broader consciousness that transcends physical limitations. Dr. Elizabeth Kuhn, neurologist specializing in consciousness studies at the University of California, notes, "What's remarkable about this concept is how closely it aligns with emerging theories about distributed consciousness. We're finding increasing evidence that awareness isn't confined to brain activity." Blavatsky seems to have articulated a model that accommodates both localized and non-localized consciousness. Most provocatively, the manuscript states there's a location where this second self can be accessed during physical life. Blavatsky describes a specific meditative technique, which she warns should only be attempted under precise conditions, that can temporarily shift awareness to this dormant aspect of consciousness. When the veil between primary and secondary mind is pierced, she writes, all limitations of temporality dissolve. Past, present, and future are revealed as simultaneous expressions of a single moment, what some traditions call the eternal. Now, the third and perhaps most controversial revelation came from an envelope sewn into the manuscript's cover, sealed with distinctive blue wax bearing an unidentified symbol. When carefully opened by the restoration team, it contained a single sheet of paper with a message written in what analysis confirmed was Blavatsky's hand, though with a steadiness uncharacteristic of her final months. "We do not die, we transform. We are merely light attempting to remember itself." This simple statement represents a radical departure from most religious and spiritual frameworks, which typically describe the soul as either ascending to heaven, reincarnating through karma, or achieving liberation through spiritual practice. Instead, Blavatsky suggests a far more dynamic model, consciousness as active memory rather than passive essence. If consciousness is fundamentally a process of remembering rather than being, observes religious scholar Dr. Mikhail Ivanov, then our entire understanding of spiritual development requires revision. It's not about earning salvation or achieving enlightenment, but about recovering complete memory, awakening to what we already are. The implications of this third revelation are perhaps the most personal. If the soul is active memory rather than passive essence, then your destiny after death is directly linked to what you remember, not just of this life but of your fundamental nature. The manuscript suggests that those who awaken to their true identity as consciousness itself experience death very differently than those who remain identified solely with their temporary physical form. As Blavatsky writes in a particularly striking passage, the degree of awareness at transition determines the coherence of memory afterward. Those who die unconscious of their nature experience fragmentation, not punishment, but natural consequence of limited identification. But the most startling discovery came when researchers examined the signature at the bottom of this final note. Though the letter was written in Blavatsky's distinctive style, the name inscribed below wasn't hers. Instead, there appeared two initials that have sparked intense debate. M.R. For those familiar with Theosophical history, these initials potentially refer to the mysterious Mahatma Maurya, one of the ascended masters Blavatsky claimed to receive teachings from. But skeptics point out another possibility. These could be the initials of a little-known Russian physicist, Mikhail Reznichenko, who briefly corresponded with Blavatsky in the months before her death. Historical records confirm that Reznichenko conducted controversial experiments with dying patients in remote Siberia during the late 1880s, using early electrical equipment to measure changes in the electromagnetic field around the body at the moment of death. His research was condemned by both scientific and religious authorities, and he disappeared from public record in 1892. This brings us to the central revelation of the manuscript, the part that has caused the most controversy among the few permitted to examine it. The final annotation reveals that Blavatsky did not write alone. A collaborator identified only as C apparently inserted the final symbols based on an experiment conducted in Siberia with pre-death patients. These patients, in their final moments of life, all described the same scenario: a sphere of light where time folds backward and the soul reviews its choices as an omniscient spectator. What's remarkable is how precisely these accounts align with thousands of modern near-death experiences documented over the past 50 years, experiences from people of diverse cultural and religious backgrounds who could not possibly have been influenced by Blavatsky's hidden writings. Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience in 1975, states, "The consistency of these reports across cultures and time periods suggests we're dealing with a universal human experience rather than a culturally constructed phenomenon." If Blavatsky documented the same patterns in 1891, it strengthens the case that these experiences reflect something objectively real. But the detail that remained unpublished, the part that truly challenges our understanding of consciousness, is that one of the patients in the Siberian experiments reportedly returned from clinical death speaking a language that no linguist could identify. Analysis of phonetic recordings, hidden in a separate archive until 2019, reveals systematic patterns that suggest not random sounds, but a structured language unknown to modern linguistics. This raises a disturbing question. What if consciousness, when freed from physical constraints, accesses domains with their own forms of communication, languages that cannot be understood within our physical frame of reference? Blavatsky's manuscript goes further, suggesting that consciousness exists in 7 distinct states, each with its own language or system of information exchange. What we experience as human thought is merely the most basic of these systems, the equivalent of a child's picture book compared to advanced quantum mathematics. In the final transition, she writes, awareness expands through successive states, each dissolving the limitations of the previous. What remains is not the person, but the essential pattern, the unique frequency that distinguishes one expression of consciousness from another. This brings us to the existential question at the heart of Blavatsky's final work. What if death is not an ending, but an awakening to what we've always been? What if our fear of death arises not from the reality of transition, but from our profound misunderstanding of what consciousness actually is? So what does all this mean for us, for you sitting there, absorbing this information that was hidden for over a century? If the soul survives as a form of active memory, rather than passive essence, it means consciousness can be reactivated through resonance, or forgotten forever if the vibrational pattern is disrupted. This isn't about judgment or divine punishment, but about natural laws of consciousness that operate with the same precision as gravity or electromagnetism. Modern science may be on the verge of proving what Blavatsky risked her reputation and possibly her life to document. Recent experiments in quantum biology have demonstrated that quantum coherence, the ability of particles to maintain connection across space and time, occurs within the microtubules of brain cells. Some scientists, including Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose, propose that consciousness itself may be a quantum phenomenon, capable of existing independent of physical structure. If they're right, and if Blavatsky's manuscript accurately describes the mechanisms of consciousness transition, then our understanding of death requires complete revision. Rather than an ending, death becomes a phase transition, a shift from localized to non-localized awareness. The implications for grief and loss are profound. Imagine knowing that the person you love hasn't disappeared, they've simply changed form, maintaining the essential pattern that defines their unique consciousness. They remain present, though not in the limited way we understand presence within physical reality. As Blavatsky writes, those we perceive as departed have not gone anywhere. They have expanded everywhere. Their consciousness, freed from the limitations of body and brain, permeates the quantum field that underlies all reality. They are not absent. They are omnipresent. Would you share this understanding with someone who has just lost a loved one? Or would you keep this secret to yourself? Would knowledge of consciousness continuation provide comfort, or would it seem too abstract compared to the visceral reality of physical absence? For those experiencing grief, Blavatsky's model offers a different perspective. Not that your loved one has gone to some distant heaven or been reborn as someone else, but that the essential pattern of their consciousness continues, accessible through attunement to their unique frequency. This isn't metaphorical. It's described as a literal resonance between consciousness patterns that remain connected through quantum entanglement. Perhaps most significantly, all evidence suggests that Blavatsky's manuscript is not the only one. A second volume was catalogued in 1892 but never located. Historical records indicate it contained practical methods for establishing conscious communication with transitioned consciousness, techniques that Besant apparently deemed too dangerous for public release. Where is this second manuscript now? Who has access to these techniques? And why have they been kept hidden for over a century? There's evidence that similar information has surfaced throughout history, only to be systematically suppressed. From the Egyptian Book of the Dead to Tibetan Bardo teachings, from Gnostic texts to indigenous shamanic practices, fragments of this knowledge have periodically emerged, only to be relegated to the realm of mysticism rather than studied as potential science. What if what we call soul is merely the first of 7 bodies described by Blavatsky? What if the other 6 remain dormant within us, waiting to be activated? According to the manuscript, each of these bodies corresponds to a different frequency of consciousness, a different way of perceiving and interacting with reality. The first body, our physical form and its immediate electromagnetic field, is merely the most dense expression. Beyond it lie increasingly subtle energy patterns that remain active after physical death, each providing access to different dimensions of awareness. Blavatsky describes the activation of these subtle bodies not as something that happens only after death, but as a potential evolutionary leap available during physical life. The practices hinted at in her manuscript suggest methods for dying before death, experiencing the consciousness expansion of physical transition while maintaining connection to the body. This could explain the extraordinary abilities demonstrated by advanced spiritual practitioners throughout history. From bilocation to apparent omniscience, these weren't supernatural powers, but natural capabilities accessed through shifting awareness to subtle energy bodies that exist beyond normal perception.